welcome to EFPSA Webinar on the topic PhD or not to PhD. We are here with 3 speakers from different countries who are willing to share their perspective on this topic. There's a lot of young people today who are still struggling with this decision whether to pursue a PhD or not. And a lot of them are not informed enough. A lot of them have questions, and even those who have information, it's a still big decision to make. So we are hoping that with this webinar, we'll help those who are struggling with this decision, but also those who just simply want to know more about PhD. We will start with a short introduction. So our speakers to shortly tell us about themselves, where they live, what they are working on, and then we can start with the questions. I can break the ice. So my name is Vita. I'm Academic Affairs Officer in the Board of Management of EFPSA. I come from Croatia, and I'm currently doing my master's in the Netherlands. And I'm very excited to hear what our speakers have to say, because as many of you, I'm also struggling with this decision. So maybe, Dean, you can start by telling us a bit more about yourself.
Hey folks, so my name is Dr. Dean McDonnell. I'm an assistant lecturer based in Carlow IT. I'm currently in front of several students. Hello. So basically I am quite bad at reading CET, so I managed to tie it into one of my classes in communications. So at the moment I am the head of Congress in April 2020. So it's one of the biggest European events, and I'm incredibly excited under quite a bit of pressure, but hopefully everything is going fantastic. So very much looking forward to what the other 2 speakers have to say, and hopefully a lot of their experience bears some of mine. So looking forward.
Thank you, Dean. Asmir, maybe you can tell us a bit more about yourself.
Okay. I'm Asmir Gračanin from University of Rijeka, from Department of Psychology. I'm doing lots of research at the department, dealing with personality, with emotional regulation, evolution of emotions, and so on. And I'm also teaching a lot, the same things basically. And what might be important here is also I'm a head of a PhD program, so I also do know some stuff about these formal things. I think that would be enough for now. Okay.
Thank you, Asmir. And the last, Peter, please.
Hey guys, Peter Lewinski. Like Vita, residing currently in the Netherlands, where I also got my PhD from, University of Amsterdam 5 years ago. After that, I did my postdoc in Switzerland. I'm still a bit active. I have a couple of papers in pipeline. Recently, one got published. So I keep myself busy also academically. Thanks.
Great. Thank you for introducing yourself. So we can start with the questions. And the first question is, let's say, a basic one for all those who are not familiar with PhD. So I would like to ask Asmir if you could explain what is a PhD and how many years does it take to complete?
Well, to put it very, very briefly, PhD studying would be a learning process where actually you study to become a scientist. That would be the first part of the answer. But basically not just a scientist, but also you learn to use scientific methods. So that means that you can use these methods anywhere, wherever you like. And well, how much does it take? It really depends on the individual, but I would say less than 3 years. That's my experience. Is almost impossible. And for example, in our program, it's possible to do it in a period up to 10 years. So that would be kind of a maximum. And I would say the average experience is something about 4, 5, or 6 years, maybe, to be more realistic. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone want to add something to this question? If not,
I can give maybe an interesting with Asmir here. In the Netherlands, it's usually 3 years, often 4. In average, according to the statistics here of the Bureau of Statistics, is 5.5 years in the Netherlands. But you can also do it a bit faster, and I think it really depends on the individual. So here I will say something interesting, and because the exception to the rule, right? So I did my PhD in 2 years and a half. Also publishing quite a bit, but it was a lot of effort. And you can do this if you have like a lot of support, especially if you get really nice funding, such as Marie Curie fellowships, because they support you with a lot of tools, and you can do it faster.
Thank you. So then we will move to another question that I'm sure a lot of students are interested in. So what are the benefits of doing a PhD? Maybe we can start with Dean telling us a bit more.
Absolutely. Like, I think one of the biggest benefits that grows, like I was quite fortunate by having kind of doing my PhD in parallel to being involved in EFPSA quite a lot. So a lot of students that would have been engaged in the research process, I would have been speaking to, having partook in EFPSA events. So in addition to kind of having a really strong, you're building a really, really nice close network as you're going through it. If you have a really good supervisor as well, which is one of the key aspects, I'm sure we'll talk about it later, they will push you all of the time to either try and publish or to get some lecturing experience or teaching experience. And you start developing an awful lot of transferable skills. So your writing will start to increase. You'll start to critique pretty much everything, even the way people make coffee. Everything becomes a kind of a problem solving. Everything is a challenge and an opportunity, basically. So PhDs very much, they test you in lots of ways, but a lot of the skills that they do teach you are their life skills for a lot of things.
Thank you. Peter?
Sure. The benefits of doing a PhD, I totally agree with Dean. It just changes the way you think. After doing my PhD and graduating, I felt like I got like plus 25 points to the IQ, right? So like you had 100 IQ points and then you get like 125. That's the kind of the feeling which you have. Lots of benefits. I think also there's one related question, for example, to a salary. You have towards academia and industry. I think in both, this is really a prerequisite or an increase to how much money you can make and command. So I think also it's an added plus.
So do PhD graduates have a higher salary?
So I don't know the exact statistics, but for example, if you want to move on in academia as assistant professor, associate professor, etc., you always get more money. I think that's quite clear. In the industry, I would also say so. For example, I work in AI, in machine learning field, and people who have PhDs, I think you're going to also see it in our firm. They might be younger, but if they have PhD, they can come into a little bit higher brackets. And I think it's quite common in Amsterdam. It really depends in which field, though. So we have to be careful because here it's a large focus on psychology, which in some countries like United States is qualified like STEM, right? So if you have a STEM degree, it really increases the salary which you can command. But I think if you are doing a PhD, for example, in psychology, you shouldn't shy away from the fact that in many frameworks like United States, actually psychological science is a STEM degree. STEM means statistics, technology, engineering, and mathematics degree. So if you can play this card and be more on the technical side, I think in many jobs you will get a higher salary in industry.
Asmir, could you share what you believe are the benefits of doing a PhD? Also, you can reflect on the question about the salary.
Agree both with Dean and Peter regarding it makes you think in a more useful way, and also you just can solve many more problems than before. There's no doubt. So it's a training. It's a good training for dealing with different issues in a better way. And then when it comes to some immediately measurable outputs, salary, for example, in Croatia, it's definitely on average it's higher. For PhDs, academia is there's no doubt, because if you want to pursue an academic career, then it's clear. But also elsewhere, if you look, for example, at people who work in hospitals, you want to be actually a doctor among the doctors, because it gives you not just a higher salary, but also kind of status. So in such environment, maybe the status is additional stuff, maybe not the best thing to think about, but also it can be useful. And I would definitely get back to the skills that you get, because even if you're not going to use to pursue academic career, professional skills are developed that you might need very specifically in some parts of industry. And if you work in a large company, you will deal with a lot of data, and this is where you need these skills that are useful for getting a PhD.
Okay, thank you. And when would you then advise students to pursue a PhD? Would you advise them to continue immediately after completing their master's degree, or would you to wait a bit?
Talk about an awful lot. Like, I have some friends that have went in from undergrad straight into a PhD, and they're doing absolutely fantastically. And then also I've had a few colleagues who've completed their masters and then maybe took a couple of years out and then did a PhD. So there's no real one size fits all, and it all depends on, again, your supervisor. It depends on your life circumstance. Like PhD, they are quite tough, but a master's is also incredibly tough. An undergrad will give you a fantastic basis and a baseline. And then it's up to you then to kind of either, if you want to grow yourself into a PhD, or if you want to go and apply for one, that's absolutely fine. But it is very much up to you and your own circumstance. Personally, I found it a lot better once I graduated from my master's. I wanted to do a PhD in quite literally every single field you could ever think of. So I met with several kind of colleagues, met with kind of mentors and potential supervisors. And until I felt that I found the right supervisor in the right area, the right field, that's when I thought it was kind of the most appropriate time.
Asmir, I believe you wanted to say.
Well, in a sense, it's always better to try to do it immediately, because at least in Croatia, but I would say in many other cases regarding the master's programs, actually the PhD is a quite nice continuation of that, because actually you continue dealing with what you were dealing before. And if you go to practice, then it's something completely different. So what sometimes happens is actually, maybe that's good as well, you have people getting back from the practice because they see that they don't want to work in practice, especially in Croatia. It's a kind of maybe different than elsewhere. And then they're completely sure that they want to make PhD because they tried actually something similar when they were doing masters, because our psychology programs are quite saturated with science, so actually people know what to expect. So if you would ask me wait or not to wait, I would say both is fine. But if you really like science, then don't postpone it.
Peter, do you have something to add?
Very nice point by Asmir and Dean. Well, for me, getting PhD was a really clear choice. I wanted to get it done really before some specific age. So I was aiming for 25 years old, and I did it. And one of the things which I really like about that and doing it as soon as possible was that the earlier you do it, the longer you can use it, right? So if you are going to live for 80 years, 90 years, you can feel that you are a PhD person for a longer time. So on an average in the Netherlands, it's like, I think 33 years old, right? So if you get it at 33 years old and you die at 75, now you can make your calculations. But if you get it at 25, 26, 27, 28, you enjoy it longer. So I think you should also think from this perspective, because those frameworks and those skills which we just discussed, you will be able to apply them to your life and have a higher quality of life for longer. And I think it's a really important point to keep in mind, which really drove me to be really motivated to finish it as soon as possible.
Thank you. Okay, and the next question is, does a PhD degree increase employability? this time we can start with Peter.
Yes, great. Employability. Yes, I was making point about the STEM degrees. I also commented on Facebook, what is it? So salary perhaps is increased. Employability, I'm not sure I would say so. Knowledge workers, so there are some keywords, right? Knowledge workers, on average, only 2% of the population has a PhD. Does it really increase your employability? I think it really depends per field which you are looking at. I like really Asmir's example about doctors in the hospitals. If you want to pursue a career in academia, you perhaps need it because it's just a must-have. It's not nice to have. So it really depends on the domain you are going to, and most psychology students after a PhD, they either are psychotherapists or they are lecturers. So there's just a prerequisite. In AI world, in industry, I think people value it, but it's perhaps not that necessary. So I don't think there's one question. I think it's a deeper question. You just have to look into your individual circumstances and what you want to do afterwards. And perhaps it increases employability, but hard to say.
I think it depends on what area you're in, and kind of similar to what Asmir was saying about different kind of faculties and different groups. But it certainly skills in your network. It does certainly makes you a more attractive candidate. And depending on whether you want to go into academia or depending on whether you want to kind of go into practice, it does definitely give you an awful lot more scope in comparison to that. Like then in terms of scales and salary, like generally every year you open salary if you're in academia, but I tend to spend that kind of raise on more tools and things to try and help my own research processes and stuff. So in terms of employability, yes, but academia can be quite ruthless a lot of the time. So you are competing with a lot of people that are in very similar positions. So for a good few years, I was associate lecturing. So basically bouncing around lots of universities, and that can be quite isolating a lot of the time as well. So it's trying to marry or balance all of those little factors together.
I would agree both with Peter and Dean. And generally, well, it's hard to measure that, but on average, I would say yes, it does increase employability. But the maybe this important question here would be: do other things that you might do in this period also increase your employability, and what's the ratio? So it's important to have in mind that this is several years that you spend in doing something which is relatively specific. As we all said, it's kind of a transferable. You can use this knowledge elsewhere, not just in the academia, but also in whenever it's something about data collection and dealing with data. But it's important to have in mind that you could be doing something else, like training for a practitioner, for therapists and so on. So it's important to also think whether you really want it. I would say, well, it might be interesting to think in this way. Let's say you want to become a therapist, but you have also some motivation to do research. You might become a therapist, but maybe one day you will get back to the academia and also teach and also do research. So it's kind of a nice asset to have in addition. But as I said, it's important to have in mind that you also spend some time on doing this, because this is not an easy thing. It costs you a lot of time and a lot of energy. And you really have to focus on doing a PhD. In my in Rijeka study PhD study program, we have many people who are trying to get a PhD while working, and for example, that's quite hard for them. That's not easy if they are working outside of the academia. And basically not many of them succeed. So maybe this is also additional reason why not to wait, because you have more energy when you are younger, before you have kids and so on. So try to get this asset if you like it.
Okay, great, thank you. So now that we've talked a bit about the benefits of doing a PhD and the salaries and the best timing to do it, I'm really curious to hear, are there any cons of doing a PhD?
Okay, yes, great. Yes, many cons. The dark side of doing a PhD. and in general, the dark side of academia. Mental health, super stressful. I wanted to be a hardcore assistant professor. I just lived for it. I would give my left arm to become a tenure-track assistant professor, which now is not the case, but before it was. So basically, I would just pump out the publications because this was the criteria by which you are judged. So for example, in my department, it was okay for a PhD person to publish 1 paper per year. So I was like, okay, I will publish 3 papers per year. So in 3 years, I published 10. But this caused me a lot of stress. It was all publish or perish, publish or perish. And I didn't do it, to show off or whatever, because I wanted to have a chance on the market, because the candidates who were going on the market, at least in the Netherlands, if you want to get an assistant professorship, this is what you need to have. You need to have like 10 publications in good impact factor journals. If you don't want to wander around for a postdoc and visit a research group, etc., which I also did. So basically, it was a lot of stress during the PhD, during the postdoc, and searching for jobs. The funny thing here is that I got a tenure-track position in Warsaw. I also then got an offer from Maastricht University for 6-year tenure-track position, which was the position which I would give my left arm for, and I didn't take it. Because I was in different place, in different stage, I was thinking differently, and I just stick to the industry. So I think it's good that you take a long-term perspective here, and really, think about it. Do you want to work 80 hours per week to cram out those papers, or do you want to take it easy and become assistant professor at the age of 32? A bit later, whatever. It's all up to you guys, but I think mental health and stress, it's a thing which you don't hear, or at least when I was doing this 5 years ago, 7 years ago, I didn't hear a lot. That's why I'm sharing this.
Thank you. I'm curious to hear what others have to say. Asmir?
It's here. It is stressful. It might also depend on the country. So there are maybe some variants of this stress. I would agree with Peter that in Netherlands it must be quite stressful, because it's also not easy to get a position, to get a permanent position later. And generally they have a high quality of science, and I would say top in the world, among the best in the world. And people in some other countries is not so stressful, but then again there are less positions, and things are just much more fixed. So actually know that there will be no places, although there's no competition, there's also less places. It's basically, I think I said everything what I thought about the cons. It's important that you really want to do it. The best or the biggest con is if you do it and actually you didn't want to do it. So you have to think about whether you like science or not. And I think a good reference is what a student was doing during master or bachelor program, because that's the closest, let's say, to what we do here. Although of course this is much more complex. But when you go to praxis, then it is something completely different in most instances.
Okay, thank you. And Dean?
Just sorry, I dropped out a couple of times, but problem-solving skills, PhDs teach you how to fix them. But I suppose in terms of cons, I don't know if the other two speakers felt this too, but every now and again you might get this like overwhelming guilt during the weekends that you should be reading, or it's been 24 hours and I haven't downloaded the study. And I'm sure this isn't just something that PhD students feel. Like, I'm sure if you're an undergrad listening in, or a master student, and you're currently experiencing that level of guilt because you're watching a webinar of several people discussing their PhD experience, that is completely normal. It's disgusting sometimes, or I felt that it was disgusting that I felt that way, but I thought I was the only one that felt that way, that I felt overwhelming guilt. But I suppose once you start experiencing and realizing that you're starting to get into this isolation, that there's no one else that you can talk to, that's when you should probably start talking to other people. And then you start realizing there's actually a huge network of people here that I can kind of rely on. So in terms of a con, you might be able to, sometimes it might feel very isolating. But if you start noticing that and start reflecting on, an awful lot of these are ruminating on the fact that you haven't been outside or you haven't read anything. Definitely support structures there are a huge help. But that was one thing. And I'm not sure if you can go back to the other two, but did you guys feel that guilt as well?
Okay, it's interesting to know. Maybe you can also answer our next question, which is something I've actually heard from my colleagues often, but I have no idea how true it is. So how true is the stereotype that PhD graduates are overqualified?
Have you ever seen that graph? Or it's even a phrase that I really like kind of coming back to, especially with some students, that sometimes the more you learn, the less you know. And it's kind of the idea that in an undergrad, again, I mentioned before, it gives you a baseline, and then a master's is something more specific. Then a PhD is even more specific. So you know a lot about a very niche area. But in psychology, we're incredibly fortunate enough that it is literally everywhere. Like any field, you can just put a psychologist in that field and they will literally thrive. But in terms of being overqualified, no, I think we're great. Like we have so many skills and there's so many opportunities in psychology with the things that we know, the things that we can do. Like our research skills are pretty much second to none. We have great kind of qualitative skills. We have great quantitative. We can do presentations because we pretty much do them all from day one. We're great at presenting ourselves. Like there's so many fantastic skills that we have that I think if people think that we're overqualified, maybe they should be doing a PhD in psychology.
Okay, thank you. Asmir, do you agree with Dean or?
Yes, I do agree. I would just add another example or potential situation. Sometimes people that get a degree, they actually feel unfairness because of the fact that they didn't get certain type of job or something. So maybe this is kind of a trap that people should not fall into. Actually, you got a PhD because you wanted this skill, and you should not expect that immediately you are going to be employed. So that's something to watch for. And then again, it depends on the country. In Croatia, we often say, well, the better you are, the people will hate you more because you're better than them, and so on. So maybe in some cases, it can be a problem. But I would say, like with anything else, if you're too motivated or you try to change the world, then people will actually have a problem with that. But being overqualified, by my opinion, that cannot be a problem. I would agree with Dean. That can be just a good thing.
Okay, thank you. And Peter?
Very nice question. I like it a lot. I think if someone tells you that you're overqualified, they just perhaps don't want to hire you. So I would just move on and find something else. In our firm, in AI, we really like PhD graduates, and we are quite proud about it. And actually, all people here have a master's degree. At least a lot of have PhD postdocs. We actually sponsor PhDs and research work. I think, can you be, there must be a match, like Asmir and Dean were saying, there must be a match between the job you are applying and your qualification. Just look for the qualification which require PhD, and there are many of them. I think it's important to not have unrealistic expectations. Asmir pointed out this very well. You can get this feeling, especially after graduating with your PhD, like, what is mine? And they just hire me and I don't have to do anything. It will write to me on LinkedIn. No, you actually have to go around and knock on a lot of doors that people will take you in. And I think you have a higher chance applying to organizations which hire PhDs. And you can check it on LinkedIn, right? You just go to LinkedIn and you go through the list of people and what they did in the past. If they have some graduates there, you are not overqualified and you can apply there.
Okay, great. Thank you. This is really nice to hear. The next question, I will also ask Peter to reply. The question is, what are some typical careers after doing a PhD?
Yeah. I could ask this question about pretty much anything, right? What are typical careers after doing a master's degree, or what are typical careers after doing this or that? The world is wide and open. You can do anything. You can open your own business. You can go to academia. You can do all the things which we discussed. Maybe I will take a spin of it and share a bit of personal story here. I think you can combine things. I think you can get this extra flexibility that actually if you can step into this other world if you want to, and you can stay with both legs in two parts. So you can at the same time be doing a bit of industry work and working for a firm and a bit of academia. And I think there are some firms which allow us, for example, Google. You work as a software engineer and you get the famous 20% of your time to work on projects which you want to, which most people actually, researchers, people after PhD work on doing publications. And this is the case also in our firm. So you can get, of course, you have to talk and arrange it, but you can do it, right? And you can also see it my case, in my example, where I left academia in 2017 or 2018, but I still have a lot of papers in pipeline. I am editor in a journal. I review papers, help out here with supervising students, looking at the publications. So I think you have a lot of typical careers, but you can also make it your own. You can make it atypical. Why do you want a typical career? Why do you want? Wait, of course, you can follow that if you want to. But once you do a PhD, I think you got a virus in you. And as Asmir said, you always can come back, right? You can always, it's not like you do it or you don't do it and then it's like, black and zero. No, after 5 years, after 10 years, you can go back and being a professor. So you can either do it at the same time or slice and dice.
Okay, great. Thank you. Would you like to add something?
There was made aware a few years back actually that there was a colleague in a university based in Ireland, just to make it a little bit less identifiable. But this person spent 4 years undergrad, 3 years masters because they did 2, and then spent about 6 years on a clinical doctorate program, accompanied balancing up with a PhD. I think they had done parts of it online. But after, I think what was about 13 or 14 years, they closed up everything and retired to the south of Spain and opened up their own bar. So the idea behind that was that as soon as they got there, they said, you know what, maybe this isn't for me. And then maybe I should try and do something different. And maybe my passions lie somewhere else. But then when they got to Spain, they spent a couple of years in Spain. They actually then, because students used to go into that particular bar, I know where it is, I'd love to go. But students are coming in and then people start realizing that there was a guy or a girl or somebody who was in this particular place that knew a lot about psych. And then they ended up doing guest talks in a particular university in Spain. And then they ended up being an associate lecturer by complete chance and complete mistake. So even though they had basically not turned their back on psych or anything, but they said, let's try something else for a while. And that, if you feel as though you just want to maybe kind of sidestep and do something else and try new things, why not? That's entirely up to yourself, and that's entirely your decision. And hopefully you would have a kind of like a group of people that would be able to help you make that decision. But that I just thought that was a fantastic. When I heard of it, I thought that story was great. But yeah, everything is open. Like if you want to do something, do it.
And Asmir, would you like to add something on this question about the typical careers?
Well, not much to add. Maybe I'm not the best person to talk about industry, but maybe just a hint for what might be happening in academia now. I think there are more and more interdisciplinary programs and interdisciplinary research programs. So what would happen is that there would be also more need for, especially for psychologists, for PhDs in psychology, to join some groups that are not dealing just strictly with psychology within academia, but also collaborating with other people. This is already the case in the West, but let's say in Croatia, this is now just starting to happen. Until recently, psychologists actually in academia were working basically only in psychology departments, maybe at medical faculties, but now they're starting to get on many different places. And I think there will be more actually places in academia in future for psychologists, especially because we are really good in methodology. Still, what I see from my own experience, if you look at other PhD programs, especially unfortunately in Croatia, which are not psychology but which are social sciences or humanities, the methodology is much poorer. So there is so much place for skilled researchers in other places, academia as well, not just psychology.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess we can move to the second question, which is, could someone pursue a PhD in an area that is not the same as that of their master's? And what are some advantages and disadvantages of this? Dean, you can start.
I would not struggle, but I'd find it hard not to be able to link whatever I've done in master's to whatever I'm doing in a PhD, because you can arguably you can always tie anything in. Everything is always going to be relatable when you start looking into psychology an awful lot. But I suppose I did my master's in cyber psychology, so it was the area of how technology influences people's behavior. And then I decided to do a PhD in a school of education rather than a school of psychology because of perspective. So I wanted to understand how individuals within education interacted, and I wanted to see how relationships between students and teachers could kind of mitigate any negative mental health issues. And I was very much interested in that kind of Rogerian aspect of human interaction. And I thought that the best place to go would be a school of education rather than a school of psychology, because that's where education happens. So that was very different in terms of my master's in lots of ways, but the entire area of cyberpsych is looking at interaction and looking at kind of how we can interact between humans and computers, obviously, but computers to kind of support interactions between people from long distance, et cetera, et cetera. So I wasn't really a million miles away in terms of my master's and my PhD, but I think, I think it'll be very hard not to find that ties between a master's and a PhD.
Okay, thank you. We also currently have a poll with our participants. So we asked the question to see how many participants who would like to pursue a PhD would like to do it in the field of psychology, and how many would actually like to go to another field. The answers are quite interesting. We have 79% students who would want to stay in the field of psychology, and the rest is not sure. So we have 0% of students who would want to change the field, but I'm still curious to hear what Peter and Asmir think about this, about changing the field and the advantages and disadvantages.
Yeah, so to answer the question, technically, yes, you can. You get a master in something, a bachelor and master in something, and then you can do a PhD in something else. It gets even crazier. You can do a PhD in psychology, and then you can become assistant professor yet in something else, which, for example, happened to me. I moved from social and behavioral sciences. I didn't do a PhD in psychology. Technically, I did in the Department of Communication Science, but it was in the Faculty of Behavioral and Social Sciences, so I have a PhD in that. And then I went on working as a postdoc in Faculty of Economics. Then I became an assistant professor in a business school. So you can do your PhD in psychology, no worries. But after that, you will really find out where your interest lies, and you will discover that you can move kind of freely. Maybe some domains are, not for you. But even you could try to. It really depends what your specialization is, right? You could even go to do it in law. Pretty much, maybe not physics or biology, maybe biology too, but physics, for example, would be too difficult, right? One tip, many people who want to kind of combine industry work because this is where you are paid more. They do a PhD in psychology and they go to be a professor in business schools because they earn more. And perhaps the same is true for a PhD. So you can also take that into consideration that if you have a master's in psychology, you would like to have a PhD in business school because you will perhaps get a better salary. Because as a PhD student, you have to teach the MBAs. And MBAs, a Master of Business Administration students, are very profitable for business schools.
Okay, thank you. And Asmir?
Yes. Well, it might be important, as Peter said, where are you turning to? If you switch from psychology maybe to physics, that wouldn't make so much sense. But if you switch from psychology to, let's say, law or maybe media, then that might be interesting because of these reasons. In some cases, we are really qualified in psychology to deal with human behavior. We have a great methodology compared to other branches of science. It depends on the country, but let's say in Croatia, if you have a master in psychology and you try to do research in law or even in economy, you will be a king there. So that might be interesting way to do it. I think it's really local, but people should think about these possibilities. Then again, the next question is who will be your supervisor? Because if you are going to be a king there, that means that people there don't have lots to offer you. Actually, you bring something. Then we open another issue. What about the supervisor? As Guy said, already supervisor is an important person, but it depends also how well self-sufficient you are. You can do a lot yourself because in the end it's all about you reading and being creative. So my recommendation would be try to stick where you are. So if you try to stay in psychology, but later maybe you can think about other fields where you can offer what you have. My own experience is teaching methodology at another university in a PhD program as well. And I see that these people there, they are quite heterogeneous, but many of them didn't even know what is a variable, what is, very basic methodological things. So the question is, would I like to pursue my PhD there? Basically not, but if I did, it would be also much better for me than for those other PhDs there. So you have to wait.
Okay, great. Thank you. We are slowly approaching the end of our webinar, and we still want to leave some time for questions for all the students who are still curious and have their own questions. Please feel free to write them, and then we will read them out loud, and the speakers will answer your questions. So I would like to thank the speakers for joining us, and thank you for sharing your opinion. It definitely helped me. I also hope it helped other students. I will now give a word to George, who will read the questions from our participants, and then we still have around 10 more minutes before we finish our webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Vita.
Hello. Okay, so I am now going to read through some of the questions that we had. Please bear with me. So the first question is from Halmos. I'm not sure if I understand what was told about the technical side of psychology. Can you please go back to that?
And I think you mean the technical in a sense that it's qualified in some places, psychological science, a STEM degree, STEM, which is perceived on the market as a better type of degree because it's more technical. And this is what Asmir was alluding to, because we understand such concepts like variable, experiment, statistics, variance, correlations, all of those methodology parts. So that's the only thing which I meant, that maybe you sometimes experience that doing a PhD in psychology is worse than doing a PhD in AI or in physics, and you are not as smart as they are because they are STEM PhD graduates and they are just like, so much smarter than you are. But it's not true. This is just not true. And my answer to this is, hey, what do you mean? Psychology is also STEM degree. And then it gets the conversation going. It triggers some people. So, you can define yourself. And I think you should point it out in general, when you talk with people, when you think about it, but also when you apply for grants proposals or talking with researchers from different domains, talking with co-authors, because often, as Asmir also said, you work in the multidisciplinary teams, right? And people don't know, if you're not a psychologist, what kind of toolkit you bring with you. Because if you have a PhD in IT, they know, you know how to program. Yeah, but many psychologists also know how to program. So I think you should just use this keyword, this buzzword, STEM, I think is STEM, right? More in your daily life.
Okay, thank you, Peter. I hope we answered the question. I hope the person is happy with the answer, and we can move to the second question. George?
Yep. So the next question is, what kind of academic positions exist after a PhD? Brackets, I hear postdoc, assistant professor, tenure track, associate professor, and what are the differences?
Okay, so there's a merge there of different types of rank, well, not ranks, I suppose, but different types of schemes. So in terms of you have a PhD, and then once you have a PhD, you can then go forward to a postdoc, which is essentially a research position in a university. But you could also do some kind of postdoc marrying up like an organization or an academic university or institution. So that would be considered a postdoc. And that's pretty much as high as you can go. There's also a really cool degree, I think a few universities do it, which is basically something called a higher doctorate, which sounds deadly. And one of them is called a Doctor of Letters, which is really cool. But so there are a couple of other steps that are kind of hidden in some universities, so definitely look those up. But then in terms of academia, this changes and it depends on the type of third level institute you're working in. So at the minute, I'm working in an institute of technology, and basically they do things a little bit different. So they do things like an associate lecturer or an assistant lecturer or a senior lecturer. And the equivalent of that in a university would be an assistant professor or a professor, or so there are lots of little kind of nuances and differences between them. Like the different salary scales would be reflected in those differences as well, but it entirely depends on the country that you're in. And I'm sure Asmir will be able to tell a little bit about what things are like the scale in Croatia, and equally then in the Netherlands with Peter and stuff. But it depends on the actual university. Generally, they do pretty much exactly the same tasks. Like they go in, they have class time, interaction time, and then hopefully during term time, you might have a few hours to do some research. But in general, they are two different things. So you have the postdoc on one, which is more research and stuff. You might be able to do some teaching as well, but then you also have the assistant lecturer and lecturing side.
Maybe Asmir, do you want to add something?
Yes, this is the description that I would agree with. Maybe to stress just that postdocs are positions that are not permanent, so you can go from project to project, and that might be quite distressing, but also quite interesting because you can try different academic institutions and so on, and it's purely related to research. If you become an assistant, then there is a higher chance that you will maybe stay there, get a tenure, but I think there are huge differences between the countries. In each case, when you become an associate professor, then it means that you would probably stay there and then also go forward, become a full professor and so on. So postdoc is kind of a stressful thing, but I would say also a good thing to try different options.
Okay, thank you. I think we can move to another question, George. We still have a few more minutes.
Thanks, Vita. The next question comes from Jareen. I heard Dean talking about choosing a supervisor. What things, brackets, characteristics of the supervisor's field of study, etc., should we look out for when applying for a PhD?
Myself and my supervisor had this really, really technical formula that we had, and it was really interesting. We decided very early on. So it's basically 1/4 PhD, 3/4 how are you doing and how's your day. So basically we went in, if we had a 1 hour session, 15 minutes was very intense PhD conversation. But then the 45 minutes was, let's talk about how you're doing. Let's talk about you. Let's talk about how's your family? How are things getting on? I found that fantastic. Mainly because like there were some days I went in and I just didn't know what to talk about. But just by basically saying this is everything that's going on inside my life, all of a sudden things start helping and things start clicking. So you kind of remember as well that supervisors aren't just there to support your academic career, and they're not there just to support the research you're doing. They're basically there to try and nurture you and try and help you develop and help everything, all of your decisions. Like keeping in mind as well, their name is going to be on your PhD as well. So it's very much their responsibility to help you. And if they can help you grow and develop along that way, that's a fantastic thing. Absolutely. But then just in terms of that, like the relationship is absolutely incredibly important. Like, I mean, what do you guys think? What are your main characteristics?
Peter, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. For me, the supervisor, remember when I mentioned this upgrade of 25 IQ points? It's all thanks to them. I was really dumb, but they made me really intelligent. And how did they make it? Because they were writing comments in the track change of the doc document of hundreds of versions of my writing. So my PhD is like 160 pages, but there are countless versions of that. And they really put a lot of effort, like really hours and hours and hours and hours into giving me feedback. So if you can find a supervisor like this, who meets with you twice a month for 1 hour and a half, and if you have two supervisors, that's even better. And outside those meetings, they give you written feedback, highlight things, and rewrite them for you and with you. Then you found yourself the thing which you are looking for, which is the person who's going to teach you how to think and how to write. That's my principal criteria for the supervisor. Because if you get this, all the other things follow. They usually are nice people. They will treat you well. They will, do all those things which Dean mentioned. So I would, keep it there.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we can move to another question because we still only have a few minutes. And George said that there's a lot of questions. So maybe you can read the third one.
Yep. So the next question is from a person called Christoph. Hi, I heard about double degrees, the possibility of doing a PhD at two schools at the same time. What do you think about it?
So there is a mix of this, right? It's usually, there are very few positions where you get, when you can do a degree at the same place at the same time. Usually what happens, you go on exchanges. So you're a visiting fellow. I did that. I recommend it. It's pretty cool. Often it's a requirement to move forward for a postdoc or an assistant professor. People want to see you that you moved around. So if you don't get it, when you are doing your PhD, 3, 4, 5 years, you can definitely get funding during PhD to go somewhere else. And you should apply. And you can go actually to pretty cool places. I was doing my PhD at University of Amsterdam. I got accepted for a visiting fellow to Stanford. I couldn't go. I went to Leuven in Belgium. Also pretty nice. So I would not sweat about it. Wouldn't make it my main criteria. I would play it out later during my PhD.
Okay, and then maybe we can move to another question. I suggest we read 2 more questions because we are already approaching the end. So 2 more questions and then we finish.
Okay, that's perfect. The next question is by Marzia. What do you suggest for someone who is interested in psychology/behavioral research but don't want to pursue a PhD?
That's quite an interesting question, but why not do a PhD if you want to do research? Yeah, that's true.
Once you start that, you are going to want to do a PhD. So,
yeah, that's it.
So that is going to happen. So yeah, you will fall down that. You will start loving your research so much. Your supervisor will probably say and push you to the point where you are going to want to do a PhD. Then you can go to Croatia and study under Asmir because he sounds fantastic. So like absolutely, like you will if you do that, if you kind of put your foot into the research side of things, you will definitely end up in doing a PhD.
Thank you, Asmir and Dean. And then we move to the last question.
Thanks, Vita. The next question is by Thomas, and he asks, what are the benefits, if any, between PhD and PsyD in practice?
I think Doctor of Psych. It's also interesting, right? Because PhD is a Doctor of Philosophy in Psychology, while PhD is a Doctor of Psychology, and you also have variations on that in different fields, like Dean also mentioned. So from what I remember, PsyD, it's really an American concept, maybe also a bit of UK. You don't find it a lot in mainland Europe. I think PsyD it's for to become a counselor and a psychotherapist. You guys, Dean and Asmir, you can correct me on this. Basically, of course, if you do a PhD in psychology and you do a lot of contact hours as a therapist, you can also qualify as a therapist in the United States. But if you do PsyD, it's much more focused on that. And I think there's less research required than in the PhD. So if you want to be super cool, you could do a PhD in psychology and follow the psychotherapist path. But I think few people do this. But also it's a US focus. So unless you are thinking of moving to the United States and working there, I don't think this is such a relevant question for Europe.
There's another aspect to it as well, that your professional body. So in Ireland, we're under the professional body would be the Psychological Society of Ireland. But they have things called chartered member. So if you're a chartered member of your national body for psychology, it means that opens up a couple of titles that you can use. So being a chartered member, I think I'm just trying to find it here, of the PSI means that you can use a particular acronym. Or even with I know with the BPS as well, because we've been doing a bit of work with the BPS, but it depends on, with some situations, like I know like there's DClins, which is a Doctor of Clinical Psych, and lots of other ones, but there's also other aspects of, if you're a registered member of your psychology body, you could also use a different title depending on what that acronym might be. So that's another side of it, just to be very much aware of.
Okay, thank you. We are a bit over time, and I think we won't read any more questions, so we will finish here. I would like to thank our speakers and sharing your opinion on this. I find it quite helpful. I also hope that other students do. And I also hope you enjoyed. It was a pleasure talking to you. I would also like to thank George for supporting on the technical side, and also the whole board of EFPSA for helping us organize this. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope it's a bit clearer for you whether you want to pursue a PhD or not, and in which area and so on. Hope you enjoyed it.
Okay.